Right now, you can prove who a father is with a DNA test. A simple swab, a laboratory, a few days of waiting. But imagine living 40,000 years ago. No science, no hospitals, no birth certificates, no way to prove anything. Motherhood is a biological certainty. When a woman in an ancient tribe had a baby, everyone saw it happen. There was zero doubt whose it was. But fatherhood is a biological mystery, a guess, a leap of faith. And yet, human societies still formed families. Men still protected, fed, and raised offspring. So here is the question. Before marriage laws, before religion, before science, how did ancient humans actually know who the father was? And more importantly, did they even care? The answer is going to completely shatter how you see the modern family. Because for most of human history, fatherhood was not about certainty. It was about survival. We need to start with one uncomfortable truth. Human babies are a nightmare to raise alone. A baby deer walks within hours. A human baby cannot even survive without constant care for years. Human childhood is absurdly long, which meant ancient mothers needed help, protection, food, support, and ancient fathers needed some reason to believe the child they were investing their entire life into was actually theirs. So how did they figure it out? The first answer is surprisingly simple: time and observation. Most hunter-gatherer groups were small, usually between 50 and 150 people. There were no strangers, no anonymous lives. If two people formed a bond, the entire tribe noticed. If someone broke trust, everyone noticed that too. But here's the important part. They were never fully certain. Nobody was. And that uncertainty shaped human psychology forever. In fact, some evolutionary psychologists believe one of the strongest emotions humans experience, jealousy, was partly shaped by this exact problem. Because ancient women always knew a child was biologically theirs, but men could never have absolute proof. So ancient male psychology evolved around reducing uncertainty, guarding relationships, watching for betrayal, staying close to partners. But evolution did not just rely on jealousy. It built a bizarre psychological trick directly into our reproduction. When a baby is born today, what is the very first thing people say in the hospital room? He has his father's eyes. She looks exactly like her dad. Scientists believe this behavior is ancient. Men subconsciously searched for signs of resemblance, because 50,000 years ago, a man needed a reason to invest his resources into a screaming infant. If the baby looked like him, his brain fired a chemical signal of recognition. This is mine. Protect it. Evolution literally shaped our psychology to look for ourselves in our children, just to convince ancient men to stay and help. And they needed that convincing, because the alternative was brutal. If a modern father doubts his paternity, he gets a lawyer. If an ancient father doubted his paternity, the child often died. In a world of freezing winters and scarce meat, a man was not going to give up his calories for a child carrying a rival's blood. If a baby didn't have a recognized protector, if the tribe suspected the mother had been with an outsider, that baby was often abandoned in the snow or left in the forest. Paternity was not about family drama. It was the literal difference between surviving the night and being left to the wolves. Which leads to the first massive shock of ancient human life. Because the stakes of fake fatherhood were so deadly, many ancient tribes completely bypassed the biological father altogether. In many hunter-gatherer societies, Your biological dad was practically irrelevant. The most important man in your life, the one who fed you, trained you, and protected you, was your mother's brother, your uncle. Why? Because it's the ultimate evolutionary loophole. You can fake fatherhood, but you can't fake being born from the same womb. A man could never be 100% sure his wife's baby was his, but he was 100% sure his sister's baby shared his bloodline. So men poured resources into their nieces and nephews, because that was the only guaranteed genetic investments in a world without DNA tests. And it gets even crazier. Anthropologists studying indigenous societies in the Amazon discovered a survival strategy modern science calls partible paternity. Many ancient groups believed a child was not made by just one man. They believed a child was built over time, accumulating traits from multiple men. If a mother wanted her child to be a great hunter, she slept with the best hunter. If she wanted the child to be wise, she slept with the storyteller. To us, that sounds like chaos. To them, it was a genius insurance policy. If a child had 3 or 4 fathers, that meant 3 or 4 different men in the tribe felt responsible for protecting and feeding that child. In a brutal world where men died constantly from hunting accidents and predators, having only one father was incredibly dangerous. If that one man died, the child starved. But if a child had 4 fathers, the child survived. Ancient women weren't acting recklessly. They were building an invisible shield around their babies, weaponizing male psychology to keep their children alive. So what changed? Why did humanity become so obsessed with female purity, virginity, and absolute proof of one true father? When did we lock down the family? About 10,000 years ago, the agricultural revolution. Humans stopped moving and started farming, and for the first time in human history, we invented property, land, cattle, stored grain, wealth. Once a man spent his life building wealth and fencing off land, he wanted to pass it down after death, but only to his actual bloodline. Suddenly, sharing a child with multiple men was no longer a survival strategy, it was an economic disaster. If land was going to stay inside the family, paternity had to become certain. So, society shifted completely. Matrilineal tribes weakened, patriarchal systems expanded. Marriage became a strict contract tied to inheritance and reproduction. Women became heavily controlled and guarded. Because in a world without DNA testing, the only way a man could feel certain a child was his was controlling access to the mother. The modern obsession with knowing exactly who the father is didn't come from human nature alone. It came from economics. Property created the nuclear family. But underneath all the modern systems, the DNA tests, the legal documents, the ancient truth still remains. Ancient humans didn't solve fatherhood through certainty. They solved it through community, through trust, through shared survival. A father was not just someone who supplied DNA, he was whoever brought meat to the fire, whoever stood between the child in the dark. We traded a village of protection for a piece of land and a name. But the human brain still remembers a time when it didn't matter whose blood you carried. It only mattered who kept you alive. If this changed the way you think about human relationships, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.